Just think about that for a second. Imagine saying those words while you're literally dying from a painful, rotting cancer. That one statement right there, it just cuts to the absolute core of one of the 20th century's most fascinating and, frankly, enigmatic figures. It's one of those quotes that just forces you to stop and ask, what on earth did he mean?
Okay, so let's get into it. We're not here to talk about saints or burn incense. This is an unvarnished dossier. We're going to treat Ramana Maharshi as a case study in consciousness itself. We're peeling back all the layers of myth and devotion to get to the raw data of his life and, more importantly, his method.
So, where does a story like this even begin? Well, you might think it starts with years of intense spiritual practice, right? Nope. It starts with a sudden, absolutely terrifying event that happened to a completely ordinary teenager. This is the moment, the literal flashpoint that creates the man we're about to investigate.
And if you look at his early life, there is just nothing to suggest what's about to happen. He was a normal kid. He was known for being a strong swimmer and a really heavy sleeper, not for being some kind of deep thinker. In fact, he had zero interest in philosophy. Then, in 1895, something strange happens. He hears a relative mention the word Arunachala, it's the name of a sacred mountain, and for some reason he can't explain, it just captivates him. And then, just 1 year later, in July 1896, everything changes forever.
Now this is what's so wild. When this sudden fear of death hits him, he doesn't pray, he doesn't cry for help, he does something incredibly strange. He conducts an experiment. All alone in his uncle's house, totally convinced he's dying, he lies down on the floor, holds his breath, and makes his body as stiff as a corpse. He decides to investigate death head-on. And in that moment, he has this incredible realization. The body can die, sure, but the awareness of I, that feeling of I am, it's completely separate. It's totally unaffected. And just like that, the fear was gone. And frankly, so was the person known as Venkatarama.
So that single experience became the bedrock for his entire teaching. And what he taught wasn't some fuzzy, abstract philosophy. It was a repeatable technique. You could almost call it the ultimate mind hack for taking apart the very idea of self. And this is it. This is the core of his method, called Atma Vichara, or self-inquiry. It's basically a 4-step investigation. First, you just notice that every single thought, fear, desire, a memory, whatever, it's all happening to an I. Okay, step 2. When a thought pops up, you pivot your attention and you ask, wait, who is having this thought? The obvious answer is, well, me. That's step 3. You immediately hunt the source with the question, okay, then who am I? Where is this me actually coming from? And step 4, dissolve. As you turn your attention inward to find the source of that I feeling, the original thought just evaporates. It can't survive the investigation. It's like trying to get a flashlight to shine on its own light source. It just can't do it.
But he was also a pragmatist. He knew that this direct, head-on investigation wasn't for everyone. If your mind is just too chaotic and agitated for that kind of focus, he offered another path, total surrender. Just give the whole burden, your problems, your fears, your very sense of being the person in charge of your life. Give it all to a higher power. But here's the catch. It has to be total. You can't give it away and then secretly keep worrying about it. If you're still worrying, you haven't really let go.
And to make this whole process a little less, abstract, Ramana often talked about the hridayam, or the spiritual heart. Now, we're not talking about the physical organ that pumps blood. He actually located this as a spiritual center on the right side of the chest. This, he said, is the source point of consciousness in the body. It's the very spot that the I thought springs from, and the goal of inquiry is to trace that feeling all the way back to its home base.
Okay, but the teaching is one thing, right? Real life is always another. Because while the philosophy might be pure and simple, the reality that grew up around him, well, it was anything but. To get the full, unvarnished picture, we have to look at the messy, human, and often pretty controversial system that formed around this silent man who wore nothing but a loincloth.
And this slide really lays out the friction points. I mean, while Ramana himself claimed to own nothing and want nothing, a whole institution grew up around him. There were accusations of nepotism, with his own brother running the ashram like a business. There were nasty legal battles over ownership. And people questioned his lack of social activism, especially on the issue of caste. And then, of course, there was the brutal reality of his final illness.
So you might be wondering, how did he respond to these very logical, very fair criticisms? Well, his answers were often maddeningly paradoxical. When people asked about his family basically building a financial empire around him, he'd just say he was a passive witness to their karma. When they pushed him to get involved in India's independence movement, he insisted that realizing the self was the single greatest help anyone could give the world. He just flat out refused to be a social reformer, which, you can imagine, drove a lot of people crazy.
And that brings us to maybe the most difficult part of his story, his death from sarcoma. Get this, he underwent 4 incredibly brutal operations for his cancer, often without any anesthesia, and he reportedly just watched the whole thing with complete, utter detachment. This just shatters the popular spiritual idea that enlightenment somehow makes you immune to physical suffering. For Ramana, the body had its own destiny, its own karma, and that had absolutely nothing to do with the real self.
Okay, so after all of that, the incredible story, the powerful teaching, the messy controversies, what's the takeaway? What do we do with all this? How do we turn this philosophy into something practical we can actually experiment with ourselves? It really all boils down to this single powerful idea. Ramana's life suggests that real freedom, it's not found by fixing everything outside of yourself. It's found by investigating the very entity, that I, that feels the desperate need to fix everything in the first place. It's a radical shift in perspective, moving from a focus on action to a focus on pure awareness. And look, you can try the basic technique right now. This has nothing to do with belief, it's just an experiment. For just 10 minutes, find a quiet place to sit. Don't try to fight your thoughts or silence your mind. Just wait for one to pop up. When it does, just pivot inward and ask that simple question, to whom is this happening? And then just try to feel where that sense of me is coming from in your body. That's it. That is the entire path, right there in miniature. Which really leaves us with one final and pretty provocative question. This is the central mystery that his entire life was pointing towards. If that constant chattering I in your head, the one that worries and plans and gets hurt and suffers, if that I is ultimately just another thought that comes and goes, what's left when you finally stop believing it's you? What remains?